You're listening to Blind Shovel, an arts and music podcast. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with singer, songwriter, and musician Josh Ottum. Hope you enjoy. Hello.
Hey, Michael, can you hear me?
I can.
Cool.
So like all good things, they start with Dory Bavarsky, right? Is that true?
That could be true. He's been in my life for a little over a year.
Oh, okay.
Ish. So not super long, but I have to agree with what you just said. Yeah.
So how do you know him?
Yeah. We just have a mutual friend, and then turns out more mutual friends. And I kind of reached out to him just to do a project, sort of sight unseen, to record my songs at a studio. And so we first met on a session, and then we've done many since. And then I've hung out at his house a few times and stayed down there and worked on more stuff together. So yeah, kind of like a very professional context of just doing some work. And I've weirdly found that a lot of people I end up becoming good friends with, the first meeting was very not romantic, you know, not serendipitous, and not like an interesting serendipitous story of how we met or something like that. But then it turns into something kind of magical. That seems to be a pattern. Is that
true of your relationship to ideas, or do you need them to be more magical?
It's actually kind of funny. I think all of like the pivotal moments in my life, either artistically, whether it's like drumming up ideas or kind of pivoting professionally or going into a new direction with my life, usually seems to be like, if you just wrote it out on paper, it would be very boring and uninteresting and almost anti-magical, like sweating it out and just trying to come up with some random idea. And when I should have left the studio a long time ago, I just pushed it a little further, and then something seems to happen that's worth keeping. So there's like this lingering feeling sometimes of like hanging in there or kind of pursuing something that you almost feel like wouldn't make a good story down the road.
Yeah, something more laborious.
And yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you don't have to wait for the muse in some sense.
No, I think as time goes on, I'm pretty anti-muse. I think I like a lot of good I've been thinking about this stuff a lot lately. I think these days I'm very much not about the muse at all, really. I'm just about showing up and kind of clocking in.
Like a professional.
Yeah, like a professional would, I suppose. Yeah.
Were you once romantic and about the muse?
Yeah, I would say so. My like journey with music seemed deeply tied. Once I got out of being like a small little kid and started turning to music, I was really turning to it from kind of an intellectual place in junior high and high school, but it was very quickly tied up in like traumatic events and processing emotions and these types of things. So the muse was sort of like the drama of your teenage years in a way, I guess. But I remember that feeling back then of sort of being like, you know, lightning striking, here we go, kind of thing. Stay up till 3 a.m. Kind of an unsustainable practice, actually.
Yeah, I remember someone in art school speaking to me as if I was an alien because I've never been so struck by an idea that I would pull an all-nighter.
Yeah. And
There's no way
yeah.
I'm up past 1 a.m. working on anything art-related or anything. There's no way I'm up past 1 a.m. basically.
Neither am I ever again. Yeah, for sure. I avoid that. I avoid that time of night at all costs now. But was the person who said that to you sort of implying that that was their method of working?
I think so, right? Because
yeah,
that's what they knew. In art school comes with certain badges of honors about people who pull all-nighters, which just means they're really inefficient and don't manage time well.
Right.
I find. But it's a very interesting topic because the type of fuel you use throughout your life, if you're going to have a sustainable career, it has to change, I think. You can't be living drama over and over till you're 80 years old. I mean, I know there's probably artists who have, but I think it's quite rare.
Yeah, I think it's rare. I think that the folks that I know that seem to have kind of gone down that path aren't either around anymore or
right.
Those stories don't end well usually. But yeah, like pining for that kind of adrenaline that could come from staying up really late or whatever the extreme case may be. But then on the other hand, I do think if you clock in every day and you work for a couple of hours, that's like its own sense of sustained extremity, to me, like extremely professional, extremely reliable. So that's something that that's kind of where my head's at these days. It's like, it is still extreme. It's always been extremely interesting and engaging. But the extremity is like shifted now. But the energy is probably just still the same. I do have glimpses of just kind of feeling just the same charge that I felt when I had a different rhythm going. But it just happens in these different chunks of time, I guess,
But it yields a different fruit, right?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Like, I personally have been more prolific now as a older gentleman with a son and a homestead and all these, and a full-time job and all these various things. I'm more prolific now than I've ever been.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like notable for me and very surprising. So the different results, I guess, in my case are like, I guess it's more efficient, but it also feels more playful. It generally feels way better if I really compare it to maybe how I used to do stuff.
Yeah. No, I relate to that. But I do often look back and I think, there's a type of immersion I'll never get again, which I'm fine with. Largely because I have to kind of, kind of stack moments as opposed to just like bathe in some stream of inspiration. And you have to create more systems, I find. And systems cut in both directions, I think, because there's a sense of detachment there.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if it yields better or worse art. They're distinctly different, I think, but I think all good art knows how to fire the pistons off in appropriate ways, as opposed to, like, I don't know how to describe it. A factory is kind of there's no unpredictable element. It's almost like a science experiment that's locked.
Right.
But I think in art, the hard thing is when you start to develop a lot of structure in your life, I think, is how each compartment, I don't know how to, I'm having a hard time actually.
Well, I mean,
grasp it.
I think one thing I've been noticing, so I had some friends come and visit me recently, and they're friends from a long time ago, and we're all musicians, and it was sort of like, we're in this new stage in our life, but we quickly realized it was like adult music camp, you know, like they visited, we were here for the weekend and we immersed in a similar way we used to 20 years ago when we used to truly immerse and bathe, right? And I noticed as we looked around the studio, I play guitar a lot, and currently I have a bunch of guitars in my studio that are tuned strangely and strung strangely. And basically what kind of hit me at that point was that, yeah, like I'm in a system, I'm doing I have a generally pretty balanced approach to stuff, but the surprises, I'm trying to bake in some level of like uncomfortability into the system, right? So that the factory model of clocking in and clocking out and really managing time can maybe be balanced out by filling your toolbox with some things that are a little bit unfamiliar.
Right.
That and then the other thing that's helped that's I've kind of watched myself lean into in the last few years is just putting in music. I mean, it's different with art, I think, but well, no, it's the same in its own way. Just deadlines in general. So for me, it's like setting up a session to go record somewhere with somebody. It is always a bit uncomfortable and scary, and the clock is ticking, and I do want to get something out of it that I want to keep forever. And it's a definite level of pressure that has like kept the factory model feeling fresh, you know, because it's such a beautiful like mix of playing it cool enough to function well and like being scared enough to try hard and whatever else is in the middle.
Yeah, was there ever a moment where I found this moment in my 30s where things started to come very easily? Certain things, certain technical things. And I became suspicious of that.
Yeah.
But then I learned to trust that. And then, like you're saying, you pick your challenges effectively. Like you don't need to reinvent, for me, the way you draw every day. Obviously, there's going to be some tradition, you might say, personal tradition built up over time.
Yeah.
And it is funny when you make something great in 5 to 10 minutes or good, and you have to check yourself, because I think the 20s are full of a certain kind of drama and rumination as opposed to these kind of compressed and distilled methods that, again, can undermine creativity, maybe. I'm not even really buying that narrative anymore. I think we're both suspicious of that idea.
Yeah, I'm the same as you. I think as time goes on, it also just becomes kind of a relationship with yourself, right? It's sort of like this feeling. I do think maybe at a younger stage, I would be so much more aware of my peers and so much more aware of the newly introduced art I was gulping down that you were like, there was a deep, for my personality at least, like a deep hyper awareness and a deep insecurity, you know? So you make something and you go, is it, you know, is it good? Is it not? Like, who am I? What am I doing? Like a lot of these bigger frenetic questions for me back then, I guess. And then now you're right. Like if something happens in 5 minutes and you like it, there is a suspicion. And I think I've always kind of wished, I've always liked, I mean, it sounds like you did go to art school.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. I'm sure there's some shadow sides to it, but I've always admired the artist's sketchbook and also kind of like the idea of a studio critique. And a couple of these things I know from a distance about art school because traditional music school is truly like none of that. And I think lately I've been trying to look at these things like a sketchbook, right? So like if I'm making songs, those are my sketches for the day. And then if they have like legs, then I'll I'll put a little asterisk next to it, and then I'll come back and develop it further. But I'm not gonna be like, oh, that was so easy and fun to make, like it must be bad or something, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you said you had one child?
Yeah.
And how old are they?
He is 8.
Well, I'm curious how I just had a child. He's 7 months old.
Oh, wow.
But I was already drifting from my concern about peers and scenes, etc.
Definitely.
But there's something about having a child that I don't know how to, you're concerned. You can't really be concerned with some of those things anymore, I find. Or at least for me, your world becomes much tighter.
Mm-hmm.
And that in a positive sense, in the sense that all you need is suddenly right there within your home often.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so even for me, like what I'm focused on right now is making a book for my child for their first birthday.
Oh, wow.
And that feels more, it feels real and intimate in a way that I couldn't fake in my 20s. Like my work in my 20s is very abstract and anti-narrative and oblique. And I don't think I could have made personal work that resonated then. For whatever reason, I can't make it about myself, like autobiographical 90s alternative comics. Like have always rubbed me a little wrong.
They feel a little too self-centered or something, or a little too...
They feel too on the nose, and everything's autobiographical in this sense. And
yeah.
I guess I also like the mythological and the heroic too much to care about the mundane elements of like a cartoonist life or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But how did having a child affect that concern? Especially, you do live in LA, right?
I live north of LA in a place called San Luis Obispo.
I've heard of it because it has a beautiful name.
It's really pretty, yeah. But yeah, so I would say I'm already out. I'm already, and much of my life have already been out of a scene, but aware of a scene, I guess. And at the end of the day, I don't know if I've ever found a scene or quote unquote like my people. I think there's a lot of people I resonate with now more than my crew when I was younger. If that's kind of I like had a crew, but I never, there was always kind of an outsider feel, and I've always been on like geographically for most of my life as a person. I feel like I've always been on the geographical fringes of a major cultural hub.
Okay,
but I do like to swing.
What are some examples of that?
I lived in San Diego. I grew up in this place called Elfin Forest. That's where I grew up, and it's North County, San Diego. So it was neither here nor there. It was like a rural 5-acre thing, but we had a 45-minute drive to school, and the school was central and sort of a cultural hub of a certain ilk. And so I was from the get-go kind of like, I'm here in the hub, but I don't live here, Mm-hmm. And then I went to grad school at UC Irvine, which is, do you know where Irvine is?
No, I mean, I lived in Oakland.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And had some moments in LA and San Diego.
Yeah, Irvine's between LA and San Diego. And it's very betwixt and between and very, like, what's his name? Do you know who, like, Jean, like, Baudrillard is? This French philosopher.
Simulacrum fellow?
Yes. Yeah, he wrote a lot about Irvine.
Really?
because it's kind of like a place that exists sort of, it's like a non-place.
Like a liminal space.
Yes. Which are now becoming very popular amongst kids I teach who are in their 20s, who I think relate to liminal spaces more than like the physical.
Yeah, it's a bit disturbing to me, actually.
It could be, but
I have an affinity for airports. So
yeah, and I have a huge affinity for a lot of like liminal spaces myself. Yeah. But I'm getting off track. But what I would say is that yes, having a kid maybe solidified my sense of like, there's probably a better word for it than outsiderness, but I'm perfectly happy to be in the domestic cocoon, you know, and like you're kind of talking about, like exist in the world that is so like so. It's actually really intense if you think about it, you know. It's intense to realize that it's so sort of suddenly, in certain ways, very small, right? It's just about getting from one room to the next and one thing to the next, one nap to the next, one meal to the next. These types of like really kind of primal things that cut you way down, and then you kind of realize like, oh my gosh, the thought of a scene and trying to be like connected to any kind of scene is absolutely not important or not, you know.
But what does that do? You know, I think all artists want their work to be seen, not,
right.
You know, not that
Right.
scene. And I don't know, even in myself, I feel like I'm 36 and I'm in some liminal space when it comes to promo, and I don't go to conventions. I don't really push the work, but I still make the work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like my time horizon has been expanded in respect to patience. And I'm just waiting till I'm like 45 or 50.
Mm.
And what I am doing will potentially resonate in a different way, as opposed to, like you were saying before, being hyper aware of the current trend, which invariably changes the work you make, whether you think it does or doesn't.
Mm.
You know, and that's fashion, I suppose. I feel that those are two different pursuits, the eternal and what is fashionable. I perhaps they overlap, but I think the way one enters into that and gets there is very different. And I can't help but feel, and that's probably my bias at the moment, that, you know, you do enter these kind of bedrock realities when you have a child, because you participate in a thing that's in some sense eternal. But when you're kind of dabbling around in these scenes, they seem more particular, and that what they yield is more ephemeral, because it is catering to a group that will dissolve in 5 to 10 years and kind of be turned over.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I definitely. I'm just sitting here kind of thinking about the fact that like I didn't make much of anything. Like we're almost on the same timeline. Like I'm thinking when I had a 7-month-old child, I would say the first 5 to 6 years of his life, I wasn't doing too much on the creative front.
Really?
I was trying, and I also had a bit of a, not a crisis, but I do remember like booking a couple of shows as a musician when he was about to be born, not on the birth date, obviously, but, and I think it was out of this kind of, you know, like, like what if this all goes away kind of feeling. And I sort of did that, and it was fine. And it kind of like helped me realize like, that's not this thing that's been so central to my life will now be sort of replaced. I don't know if this is a similar, if did you experience any of this, by the way, when you knew that your child was coming? Did you have any sense of like worrying about, you know, it's kind of a selfish, almost scary thing to talk about, because I feel like maybe other people don't feel it. But at the end of the day, like before I had my kid, I had a kid, and the kid was music, you know, basically. Yeah. And I was just spent all my time with it, doing it all the time. And then here comes an actual kid, and it's like, what's going to happen to my fake kid, you know?
I think that real versus fake is appropriate here. My concern was I was trying to finish a book, and I didn't finish it in time, and then trying to figure it out I did
Oh,
eventually finish it in the next 4 months of his life. Was very interesting. Um,
yeah. I can relate
but
to that, by the way. I was finishing I have a PhD in interdisciplinary arts, and I was writing my dissertation when he was on his way, and I just started a new job, and those were heavy days, you know. And but his arrival was pushing me to wake up and stay up and do whatever I could to finish, you know,
yeah,
because
there's absolutely a compression there.
it was absolutely, yeah, like the fuel for the fire or whatever.
No,
But
I mean,
yeah,
I've
yeah,
spoken about it on this podcast a bit because this is a topic I'm very interested in because art school and also just generationally, I don't think there's a lot of people to talk to about having kids while pursuing certain things,
yeah,
at least in my friend circle.
yeah.
And I think because I had come to terms with I think I got my expectations set pretty properly before having a child.
Hmm.
And I also had just realized that, you know, my self stimulation in respect to ideas and work, I think had run dry a little bit. You know, I
Hmm.
can pump out design and illustrations frequently all day. That's what I do. But when it came to stuff that felt more central, I felt like I was skimming on the surface of something in my late 20s or something.
Hmm.
But then having a kid really submerges you. And I just feel a lot of reality is mediated at this point
Hmm.
in a way that is very uninspiring. And obviously, it's hard to be motivated in a deeply oversaturated uh, world.
Hmm.
But all of that, in my view, gets washed away when you have a child. It's just your relationship to creation is reinforced, I think. And I don't know, I think it is magical. You know, I think that those magical things, like you were saying before, like I don't need the process of art to be magical. I don't need it to be fun either. Um,
Hmm.
I do need it to be honest in some sense. And when you are living a life of avoidance, I do think at a certain age, if you don't have a kid, you've probably put the the obstacles in place to avoid it. Obviously, some people can't, but I think at least in my instance, I was deliberately sidestepping it so I could keep making art. And something
Yeah,
about
right.
that is
Yeah.
perverse, I think.
Yes, I know that feeling for sure.
So I think there was a repercussion to that
Hmm.
avoidance.
Hmm. You're saying a lot. Yeah, you're saying a lot of great things. I think another word. It's also making me think about a word that I also feel has been so taboo for me, especially because it gets thrown around quite a bit, which is like legacy. And
Mm.
I can barely say it. But I will say this, like just recently, it's more like an observational thing. Like I've been struck lately by the process of creation. And this is what is new for me and different. And this is as a, you know, as a person trying to make things, yeah, with a child and a family, like as I've watched myself create lately and been excited about the way it's happening, it has made me think a little bit about like, why am I doing it? Right. And like the answer to that when I was 21 was like, hopefully people will check it out and I can do this for a living or something, you know? Um, the answer to that now is I maybe like it's it's my purest expression of a side of me that I've, you know, worked hard on doing or whatever, but I also do want it to sort of last with an interest of my child being uh, exposed to it, you know? I'm not forcing my music on my child, obviously, but I have actually written a song for him that he does love. And that was probably one of the best times I ever wrote something because it was just from a purely tapped in place, you know? And so think there's an element to this stuff. Yeah, I wish there was a better word than legacy, but there's a part of me that feels compelled to continue to create things from a space of just the deep desire to do it, but also this kind of desire to make things that'll like be eternally there in some form or fashion. And that's maybe another way for me to connect with my family, and friends.
I don't mind.
Yeah.
I don't mind legacy, but I know what you mean. I think.
Yeah. I don't mind it either. Now that I'm thinking about it, legacy is okay. Yeah.
I think legacy is potentially flaccid because it's related to this world, and truly eternal things aren't here. So, what is that poem, Ozymandias, where it's just about, I can't remember who wrote it. It's just very AP English.
Yeah.
It's just about how all these great civilizations exist and then they just become dust. And I think that there's this high-minded way of discouraging legacy because of this notion, but I think it's deeper than that. And it's more immediate in a weird way. Like what's interesting is you're speaking about legacy, but you're also speaking about the smallest amount of concern, which is you and your child. You're not talking about your impact on civilization.
That's exactly what I'm getting at, I guess, is that at the end of the day, and that feels really pure for me personally, right? It's like, truly at the end of the day, I want to do this just because I'm compelled to do it. And if the results of that are like me getting to continue to do it, and if my family and friends enjoy some of the ride as well, and a couple of strangers, that really does give me peace. And that's a big difference from the anxiety of wanting notoriety when you're younger,
Yeah, and I think what becomes tricky then is quality control, because you don't have peer pressure. You have, this very small audience that probably isn't hypercritical because they love you. So they might say anything you do is good in some sense. And that's where you kind of tap into eternal values, I think, where you're not making this mark because it relates to this trend or something like that, or it looks cool, but because in essence it's true or good, I don't even know, or beautiful. I think, at least for me, that's how I think of it, that you've got to be a little careful navigating sentimental spaces without peer pressure, because something has to draw out the best in you in a way that is, at least how I view it, that has some friction to it, has some pain. And I'm almost speaking technically, I guess, the desire to be technically better, it can get washed away a little bit by love.
Yeah.
You can get a little comfortable, but I always remember, like, I'm modeling something for someone now in a very tangible way. A child looks at you as the model. So that's enough to drive me personally. That's a big responsibility, far bigger than the acceptance of peers, I would say.
I definitely agree. Yeah, it's like how is this little person watching you move through the world and relate to other people, and also then kind of relate to your work in a sense. I will say, on a very practical level, I completely agree, especially like in the musical sphere. It gets dangerous if you're just sitting there alone and you're like, here's another great idea for my family and friends or something. what's been helpful for me, like being on the periphery, is I do end up going to LA pretty frequently, and for me, that's kind of this. I mean, as you're probably aware, I found a couple of things with music specifically. It's if it's a social situation and I'm in a space with people that are functioning at a really kind of an intense level, that's been a newer thing for me, is like I want to be with those people in really compressed amounts of time. So that serves as like a nice reminder, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So when I come home and I'm alone and I'm trying to make, I kind of am trying to pretend I'm in the room with some people that are better than me, basically. Better, or, you know, more just like deeply, deeply, intensely invested in their craft. And also folks that are doing it professionally. I like feeling like I'm being, I like them kind of like feeling like they're with me, living and dead, by the way, you know, but it's easier with folks, easier with folks that are alive.
Well, with history, there's no shortage of fuel in that sense. You know,
Sure.
You just have to overcome the feeling of deep inadequacy because you know that you'll never touch certain great individuals, and you have to come to terms with that and still make things. And that's where these other motivators are important. But if we take our heads out of the clouds, I see you do a lot of different things, but what are you currently working on?
I'm currently working on a big project that I guess I've been working on for a year and a half, which is turned into, well, it's hard to say what it is, but it's turned into something like 15 records or 10 or 15 records. Many songs, you know, 100 plus songs. And there's also some zines I created with like creative prompts that are going to turn into, I mean, they're already zines that are not really circulating. I'm kind of finishing those, but that would probably be a book, like kind of and these are kind of creative prompts written to anybody wanting to make stuff. So it's not like a music specific thing. But they seem to go hand in hand with the project itself in terms of like the playful intensity that's happened over the last year and a half. And so that has been a pattern that I didn't set out to do, but it just kind of continued to unfold. I sort of joke that maybe it's a bit of a midlife crisis situation. It also feels like with the age of my son, it's maybe been a moment. He has enough independence now as a person where if I'm going to go for these like intense moments where I go, you know, record music for a little bit and come back, that's fueling me. It's almost like it's a real good fuel, I guess, for my process or something. So that's like the big thing that I've been working on, and I plan to kind of put this out into the world later this year in some form or fashion.
So if it were a midlife crisis, what? I guess I'd have to understand the arc of the other things you've done to understand how it might be.
Yeah,
you know,
well,
in that sense.
Yeah, so it actually directly, I mean, it comes from a lot of things. Like, one thing I can track though for sure is that I've been teaching full time for 10 years. And as you probably are aware, having art instructors or maybe teaching yourself, the balance of teaching and maintaining a creative practice gets difficult, or can be difficult for some. And it's always been so for me a little bit. It's just been it's been a thing that I have to be careful about. And I remember having teachers where it was like they would show examples of music they made, but it was made like 15 years ago, you know?
Yeah.
You probably are familiar in your own context, but so that felt like a moment. Like we would have guest artists come to our school and perform, and I would be like aware every time that like these were practicing artists and I was teaching, and that was okay, and I'm happy with like the life I've chosen for myself as a teacher. But I was painfully aware of this of more of a psychological rift between me and them that was pretty much self created,
Right,
you know.
right. Mm-hmm.
But and so maybe this was me like taking a humongous sledgehammer to that psychological construct and like smashing it to bits, you know.
But you're also in that teacher mode with these books, right?
Yeah, and so this is why it's been a fun project, is because I think I'm really trying to synthesize it all together to basically I guess in graduate school I got into the idea of like the participant researcher, which is like a funny way of saying somebody who does stuff and also thinks about what's happening while they're doing it or something.
Mm-hmm.
But like almost a little bit of an anthropological, or in my world it would be like ethnomusicological, you know, like somebody shows up and sort of participates in a musical practice, but also is there to sort of unwind the practices of that context.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, that's maybe what this has become for me, except, you know, it's all my work, but the work has been built by session musicians like Dory, musicians who are used to kind of spinning magic in a quick way. And I'm fascinated by those people, and I want those people to sort of influence me. And I kind of love what they do with my creative prompts, which are my songs I write, I guess. And then yeah, the creative prompt side feels like there's a whole side of me. When I was younger, I felt very worried and competitive and scared as an artist that it was a competition and I would lose, you know. I was just worried when I really look back. And now I do feel like generosity and kind of sharing and just giving away ideas and kind of playing with it all and sort of exploring the inner workings of maybe my own creative process, but not in a solipsistic way, like more in a like, have you ever thought about this? You should try this. Like, what about this? It almost, when I say it, it actually sounds just like my 8-year-old. Mm-hmm. He goes, did you ever think about this? Like, have you heard about this? Like, it's an endless stream of words all the time, from when you wake up to when you go to sleep. But in a sense, that's kind of maybe what I have iterated over the last year and a half, is like generating ideas and doing them, but from a place of of freedom and generosity, more so than check me out, buy my product, you know.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, without hearing, so how would you describe the kind of music you produce at this point?
Yeah, I'm basically a singer-songwriter who got into jazz at a certain point. And so, you know, I guess to use a generic term, it could be called indie pop, or be called something like that. But I will say all of this music came quite quickly, and I am kind of interested in getting these songs up and running very quickly with people who can dish out ideas quickly. So I do think that music has a certain, for me personally, it's kind of this blend of very accessible, approachable, listenable music that you can listen to while you eat dinner. But if you want to sit there and stare at it long enough, you can kind of enter a different universe
Mhm.
if you choose, but it's not going to force you to do that, you know? And that's actually some of my favorite art. Do you know, I know you do kind of comic stuff. Do you know Jim Woodring? Do you know who that
Yeah,
is?
he's great.
I'm thinking about him lately and some other folks where that kind of I don't know if there's a word for what we're talking about, but something about that is the same thing, right? Where it's just right off the bat, it's visually pleasing from a purely aesthetic standpoint. And if you choose, you can kind of enter the fold and be whisked away, you know?
Mhm.
I might be describing all kinds of art. I don't know at this point, but that's maybe my gold standard, or that's what I seem to be doing when I reflect on what I've been making. Yeah.
And you put this out via Spotify and things like that?
Well, none of this is out now. I have a bunch of other records out that are, yes, on streaming services and Bandcamp. And then, yeah, with this one, I have been asking myself, this is a different topic, but I have been asking myself if going on streaming services feels good, versus something like Bandcamp,
Yeah.
or just one big long YouTube video or something. So I've been trying to kind of think through stuff that I would feel really good about. Spotify and things like this feel like just a big kind of junkyard situation that doesn't feel that great to take part in, you know?
Yeah, social media feels very similar to that.
It's the same thing, totally. Yeah. So I don't know. I want to be thoughtful about it. I'm not against it, but I think I want to feel good about putting this stuff into the world, however it comes out. Yeah. But a lot of this stuff should start coming out throughout this year.
And in respect to, I often ask people how they navigate these things financially. How do you still teach or no?
I do. Yeah.
So that's was your solution to that problem, I assume.
Yeah. My solution came 10 plus years ago. I was playing music and kind of cobbling various things together, touring, starting to do this. And I do remember specific times where I was seeing folks that were a click older than me doing that life. And that's when I went to grad school, not with a huge plan to become a teacher, but it was in my mind. And then I did get kind of into the academic culture in certain ways. I started to see research papers as albums, you know, like objects that somebody put a lot of time into that you could glean some beauty out of.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a nice like parallel for me. And so, yeah, I got really into it. And so, yeah, that's been my solution. And yeah, I'm 10 years into it, and it's working. It's hard. I don't want to say it's hard. It's a good setup, but it takes a certain approach to stay fresh. You know, do you teach?
Not in profession, no. I always I have a lot of teachers in my family, so
Yeah.
I was thankfully scared away from it. But
yeah.
Obviously, I think the process of teaching is fundamental to being good at anything. I think it demands a kind of self-awareness, and then also the ability to distill and simplify information, which only helps you further understand the layers of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I've never properly taught. I hope to one day. Well, that's the beauty of having a child too. But no, like I said, I have many, many teachers in my family, and my experience of art school informs how I run the art center that I run. And I think there's definitely teaching elements within that. And I just often think about how art school failed me, and ironically, I don't think this is a negative, but my lack of exposure to art when I was young, I think is a positive, but given the world we're in today, everything is exposed. So, I think part of my job is to expose my nieces and nephews to, live music and certain books, etc.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I think about being an educator, I guess, is there are so many approaches to it that I've been noticing lately. Like, I'll just say, like, this last week, I just got done teaching for this week. And I've been a little bit of a loose cannon in class in a good way, I would say, like just spontaneous. Like, let's set up a drum set, let's mic it up, let's record it, and let's see what these compressors sound like. And I was asking, the students seem to trust me. I was asking students who don't even know how to play drums really to just hit the drums. And so we're all kind of standing out on a ledge a little bit together. And so I think what I've been trying to remind myself lately as I keep teaching is that like your teaching practice can evolve just like your artistic practice, and it probably should if you want to keep doing it. And so I've been inspired lately with that. Like I think I'm probably dropping the ball on other aspects of teaching in terms of my assessment approach to assessments and various things, but I'm also in a stage where I think a lot of students need kind of the immediacy of somebody to take them out on the ledge and try something new and see where we end up. And they seem to respond, like I don't know, this is a whole different topic, but I do think that kids of a certain age, like the world is a wild place. And if they can come in contact with somebody who's older than them and not full of hot air, like it's probably good,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to know. Yeah, teaching is just such a complex topic. And, it's funny. I find that the things that I thought I didn't need in art school were probably the best things for me. And so it's hard to know the wisdom of children and teenagers and even collegiate individuals at certain levels, and the degree to which they know or are willing to intake certain information.
Yeah. That's the most humbling part of the whole profession to me is I could truly say the perfect thing to a student at the perfect time, meaning like, they ask a question, what should I do about this? And I can give them what I believe is the perfect answer. But I'm sure a teacher did that for me when I was 21 and I just wasn't even paying attention,
Yeah.
Or I was staring out the window, or I heard it and thought, no, I'm good. Or whatever the case may be. So that's the trick with the whole thing. It's like you're kind of firing off these approaches, but there is a real similarity to the art, to the art practice, to think back to what we said about sort of mixing up your toolbox to throw yourself a bit of a curveball. Like you still have all of your sort of rote skills, your traditional and professional skills. But if you're suddenly picking up a tool that you're not as familiar with, I can still teach these students, but I can whip up a context real quick in the classroom and try to use that improvised context as a way to teach, which will inevitably keep it fresh for me and them, because you can maybe feel that we're stepping out onto a high wire rather than hearing the 80th time I've said something to, in my career or something like this, right? So I think I'm bound and determined to continue to make education something that's exciting and useful, and I also, not just useful, but exciting for me personally in the way I am as a person, because I do feel like a big black wave always hovering over me, ready to squelch all inspiration and creativity for some reason. I don't know if that's just me or the nature of doing anything for 10 plus years, you know. There's something there about it where I feel like I'm sort of like there's like a battle going on to keep it fresh and to make sure that burnout doesn't happen, you know.
This wave is above you or yourself and your students?
Well, it's probably above us all because I owe them. I have a responsibility, and I think if I let the wave crash, none of us win, you know. And I think that wave is really just a wave of stagnant sort of rote
Yeah.
teaching, right, or something like this, like just
I look at it as increasingly, I suspect the artificiality of modern life to be the problem, in the sense of,
oh yeah,
you can really wall yourself off from direct contact with the source. And it is funny sometimes, you know, I used to run a gallery, and most of the artists I showed were probably in their 20s or early 30s. And it's just, and some of them had opinions, you know, within their work, etc. And now that I'm 36, I just find it funny that anyone cared or cares. Because you look at the back of the book of, you know, I have like a lot of art books, and it's just insane the lives that people lived. You know, it's like they go to war, then they get tuberculosis, then they have, I don't know, 10 kids, or just like, there's this, it's not chaos per se, but there's just this unavoidable quality of life that I could only assume was deeply inspiring. And as a student, you're kind of, especially going into college, you're kind of getting passed from one, I don't know if they're liminal spaces, but they're kind of protected spaces often. And you're getting all this technical information often. I find that, yes, that openness is required and techniques are required, but there was some realization for me, again, that I was avoiding life. And not only was it having a negative impact on the work, but just on me in general. And it's not that I sought that out just to make better work. Obviously, that would be kind of odd. But I find that again, that kind of that mediation of modernity, it can make inspiration more fragile. But I do think, again, just even in the, maybe because I'm in the throes of it, but having a child, I don't fear for that lack of inspiration. It's just so there. I think what you end up fearing for is, do I have the time to convert it or process it, as opposed to, do I have the juice, you know?
Right. Yeah, the motivation will be there, but then the question of time just becoming more precious is just part of the deal. I also think as we get older, right? Like you know, if you have a child, these things then turn into just activities for that child as they get older, and these things like there'll be an endless litany of complexities introduced to the process that are all really beautiful, and they all take time. And so there will always be this question of like how to carve out time or something like this to stay engaged, you know.
Well, it also it threatens. Again, I'm just speaking from my own perspective, but it's funny, the purity of the experience of having a child, it threatens the potentially detached process of making work. I always thought you could sublimate your way through life. Like you could just make art until you died,
Mhm.
and that they would be your little babies, like you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
But then I just, I just watched. I guess I have like 9 nieces and nephews, and I could see through that process that there was something distinctly different going on, and it was grounded in humanity, not in, again, I make work from an abstract place. So this is this threat is interesting to me. This getting lost in fatherhood or family, not in a negative sense, but losing the time and just art is not at the top of the totem pole,
Right.
which
Right.
can make it stronger, oddly. Yeah,
Hmm.
because I believe that all things in their proper place will just the whole thing lights up.
Hmm.
But it is funny. I mean, there's a kind of worship of, you can get kind of it's funny because it's like one of the more noble distractions, art making. And
Hmm.
so you can be, your peers can revere you, or your non-artist friends can think it's so cool, and you have to sometimes be a little suspicious about it, I think.
Hmm.
That's just a whirling tangent, but for me, I'm just talking about the kind of the kind of existential threats to art making, whether it's time or it's very delicate as you go through different stages in your life, and hope to keep doing it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with not doing it for 5 or 50 years,
Right.
as long as someone is not depressed or destroyed by the fact that they simply haven't found a way to keep doing it.
That's the real question. And it's funny you're bringing this up because I do often find myself thinking like, there are all these, there are like what you just said is beautiful in terms of like, everything will kind of work itself out, right? Like if it's not the full priority, that's okay. Because when you do make it, it'll sort of like the truth and beauty of it will be informed by its place in the totem pole. But I have some anxieties about that are possibly left over from being younger, right? So there's both things at once. There's this feeling of like just let go, like let go of trying to control it all. See when the time comes up, enter your studio with like an open heart. And you know what? If you don't get anything done that day, it's okay. Like that's an extreme. And then the other part of me is kind of frenetic about it, thinking like, no, I want to carve out 2 hours and do something. And I want to do it again the next day, or I want to wake up before everyone wakes up and do something for an hour. And the jury's still out for me because if you're not careful, it can slip away, which I don't think is a bad thing unless you really want to keep doing it. And then maybe to go back to the way we started talking, sort of like, then it becomes these kind of unromantic pictures of you up at 5 a.m. trying to get in a sketch for an hour or whatever, because you're so compelled. But I struggle with this feeling because I feel like there's a non-human entity floating up there, sort of shaking its head, going, just calm down. It'll happen when it happens. Let go and just kind of see how it unfolds. And then there's kind of a scared human being going like, don't let it go or it'll drift away forever, And maybe both things are a little bit true,
Or necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say like the other thing, and this connects back to teaching too. And this could be sort of a fiction that I do perpetuate, but I have witnessed it, and I think you have too, is there is the teacher that doesn't make anymore.
Yeah, that's
And they also
a real thing, yeah.
and they also wish they were still making, but they also haven't made in so long, it's too scary to start making again. And I believe that just because I kind of could see a parallel track of myself becoming that and being a pretty sad person,
Mm-hmm.
And then I also have met the teachers that wanted to make stuff, and they did, and then they started teaching. And you could almost replace, it's different, but you could almost replace having a child for teaching in a way, right? Like, I wanted to do this thing, but then life happened or something like this, whatever it is. And I'm sort of inspired to make sure that, like, I guess whatever these stages may be that come our way, that the process of making things can still be integrated. It'll ebb and flow, but I'm just compelled. Like, there's a great Bach quote, actually. Like, I think somebody said, like, why did you write so much music? Or I don't even know what the question was, but he said, I was obliged to be industrious.
Mm-hmm. I do think that's true. I think by nature, if you're given a gift, I think it's interesting we use the term gift for what you might also say is like a talent or an ability.
Right.
If you're given that thing, then you have an obligation and a duty. And I really despise the kind of early retirement mentality that I'll encounter in certain cities. There's like specific cities that come to my mind. I don't know if I'm accurate, but they're kind of like hipster retirement centers where people kind of go there to stop kind of pushing, kind of trying their best. And there's kind of something cool about that.
Like like rural college towns like Asheville, North Carolina, maybe, or where are you talking about?
I think someone once said it to me about New Orleans, and someone also said it to me about Portland once.
Yeah.
There was this kind of, for different reasons. They're actually completely different places, obviously. But I
know what you mean.
I resent it because I think it's about giving ultimately. And yeah, that's the proper answer. I think it's very clear the people I've met who are good at art and music, they work hard, but they were given something. They're given an ability. And then, of course, to what end? How do you make it? But I think being industrious matters. I think it's, you have to watch out because there's these kind of cultures of hustling that can become corrosive, etc. But I always thought, I know a lot of artists that feel certain nausea or disappointment if they haven't made something in a bit. And not that I think it should be compulsory, but I think that is the proper response. I think
I like the term compelled. For some reason, that word feels best for me, because if I sit down and really kind of feel what all of this complicated energy is around making things, at the very, very end of the day, like my dad passed away last year, and I was deeply compelled to make things when that was all happening. And that was, when these things happen in your life, it's very intense and very similar to when a human is born, or very, there's these big moments in our lives. And I was struck by how compelled I was to want to make things, and I think that's
what did you make?
A bunch of songs.
So songs, this is where it comes out.
Yeah, a bunch of songs. And it was just
songs about that, or songs?
Abstract, like I would say so, yes, I guess, but like the lyrics could be read many ways. It wasn't hyper specific, but it was directly linked. But it was essentially like a form of working stuff out. We write to like figure out what we think, like writing is a form of thinking or something, and feeling. So I was real struck by that, like this compulsion, but in a I think in a really healthy way, like being compelled to do this particular activity that you've devoted a lot of your time to, both as like a crafts person who's developed sort of a technical craft that you could execute on the fly and do a job for money. But that same practice can also be harnessed in these moments that are not jobs at all, you know?
Right.
And that might be also the connection to like, I think this is the concept. You're helping me kind of work through this concept that keeps spinning around in my brain, which is that feeling of like being a craftsperson, but also being somebody compelled to make things, and the conversation between those two ways of working, you know, those ways of being, and figuring out how to just feel that that's integrated. And I bet you it kind of is integrated, but like that question is always looming for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the relationship, the dynamic of those two seeming contradictions. I think art, I don't think it's just art either, but it seems that all things true have a veil of contradiction, but only semantically. I don't know how to say that, but it feels superficially that it's contradictory,
But it's
but it's
probably
actually
not.
integrated. Yeah.
Yeah. I think as we're talking about it, I am kind of realizing like they're just intertwined. They're not at odds at all. But I would maybe argue like that seeming contradiction does come about from like the way that a lot of us launch into arts, which is like, are you going to be a big success like your heroes, you know? And it sets up it can set up a framework that is probably just false by nature, you know?
Yeah. Yes, we don't have. I mean, in some sense, there's an illusion of control.
Yeah.
And as you get older, you hopefully develop some grace, you know, along that way, that path. But again, you have to push. You have to grind in some sense. And I think what's interesting is sometimes that muscle that is used for that does get exhausted in child rearing or teaching, and that's where the delicate balance is required, unless you can be alchemical, unless you can. I think people underestimate the degree to which they can be alchemical, to which they can convert experience from one domain to another rather fluidly, and in a way that is explosive. And that's where time being measured in an industrial sense is scary and limiting to artists or individuals who don't want to perhaps take on some bigger adventures that are non-artistic. But I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's a lot of these. I have been just reading a book about writing, and a lot of the questions they deal with are these feelings of like, all I need is space and time, you know, like all I need is just X amount of time and space, and then I'll be able to chip away on this project. And yes, you do need some kind of time, but these days I'm often feeling like you need way less than you think you do. And it's always probably a better idea to take the dog to the park than you know, come to your studio in a mind frame that's sort of ridden with fear of the clock or something like that, you know, like. So but it's all this dance.
Yeah, I do think that is an appropriate way to frame it. So this album that you'll be putting out, when is that expected?
I wish I had something concrete about it. All I can say is it's like a lot of music is completed, and I'm currently it's probably one of my flaws as a creative person is the process of putting your stuff out. I seem to kind of stop. I seem to roll around ideas of ways to do that for longer than I need to. I don't know if that's out of fear of disappointment on finally letting it go or what, but yeah, I'm kind of currently in the midst of sorting out the particulars on that. Yeah, yeah. But 2025 is my plan.
2025, and you just released a book in 2024, correct?
I did, yeah. It's a book sort of based on the classes that I teach. It's like a nice introductory book on basics of music technology, songwriting, some thoughts on like creative careers. And so that was a fun process. I really like writing, I realized. I want to write more books.
That's noble in the age of ChatGPT.
Of nobody reading. Yeah, exactly.
Well, that too. People reading even less.
Yeah, right. You know what actually sounds really interesting though are like making zines and stuff. I've had a blast making those.
Zines are great, yeah.
And I don't know nothing. I don't know anything about the culture of zine history and production, which actually felt kind of perfect to make a zine, because my impression almost is like you should do whatever you want.
Yeah, and you should not be aware of those things. I mean, the
there we go.
Is a knowing that kind of thing is.
It's almost counter to the process of making one.
Yeah, I suppose if you want to participate in a verticality of the history of a medium, and a culture, fantastic. But whether we like it or not, we're often all kind of splayed out horizontally in pursuing our interests. And that's just the kind of it's just where we're at historically. I think it's hard to genuinely participate in some, at least from my perspective, in some of these things. You know, for me, a zine is I take 8.5 by 11 and I fold it in half, and I staple it, and that's the end of it. And it could be anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also a nice refreshing after going through like a book proper book proposal and working with a publisher and all these things. It was the opposite move, and it also kind of helps me also remember that I can make my art out in a, you know, I just worked on a record, Dory's on this record, where I wrote out notation and had scores and things like this. Mm-hmm. And then you can make the zine equivalent of music, where it's really kind of back of the napkin, pretty unprepared music, and both are beautiful and a lot of fun, you know. So that feels endlessly inspiring right now. I feel like a teenager when I think about it, tapping into like the possibility of this stuff at my in my old age. It gets me excited. Yeah.
So where would you recommend people start with all of this? Because you have a lot of, if you go on your website, there's quite a bit to delve into.
Yeah, I guess I do have a Bandcamp page, which I think is just bandcamp.com/Josh Ottum. And that would be where you could hear most all the music I've made. And then, yeah, there's my website, which I think is just joshottum.com. Or there's also like a link tree, which has a smattering of things. And you can get links to, a variety of musical projects. You could read a dissertation I wrote about background music and the way we conceive of the natural world. You could check out that book. You could see some videos. There's a lot going on now that I'm thinking about it. Yeah.
Nice. Well, it's time for me to go to bed.
Yeah, I'm getting there too, and I'm 3 hours earlier. It's time.
This was good to meet you.
Yeah, it's good to chat for sure.
Perhaps we'll cross paths one day.
Yeah.
Possible.
I hope so. It is definitely possible, yeah. Look forward to it. Thanks, Michael. This is fun.
Yeah, and let me know when that album comes out. I'm curious to hear.
I will.
Actually, what would that be under? Would it just be under your name?
Yeah, it would just be under Josh Ottum.
Okay. All right, everyone should check that out. They must.
It's a requirement.
That's right. Well, have a good night.
All right, thanks, Michael. Talk to you later.
As always, music by Dori Bavarsky and Mingja Chen. I don't know who's coming down the pipe next. Have a good week.
Josh.